We are recording. We are recording. And we're going to take a look at Old St. Vincent once again. And we start with this picture of St. Vincent, which was the way it looked around 1913 or after, because Leander Hall is in place here. This is Old St. Vincent at Latrobe PA number 5. And if you want to see any of the previous ones from 1 through 4, you can go to YouTube and ask for Jim Miller's videos of Old St. Vincent. And you should get to see some. Now, what we're doing is looking at things that have come out from the quadrangle. We've seen the quadrangle before. That was really what St. Vincent started with, and we'll see a picture of it. And this was the first thing that really came out from the quadrangle. There were other things at St. Vincent that were not attached to the quadrangle, like outbuildings down here, which we'll also get a look at. Now, this is a photo of St. Vincent in 1897. That was the same year that mapping was done. And what I want to show is the quadrangle was finished by Placid Hall, which was built in, actually finished in 1886. And of interest is the fact that the first boiler house was built in 1886. They needed this. They were starting to realize that they needed a unified heating system for the whole plant. And we'll look. What I want to mention about the boiler house here. This is not the boiler house that is there now. This was the first one that was built about 1886, the same year that the Placid Hall was built to finish the quadrangle. They needed a central heating system. And it becomes obvious that they were trying to take care of themselves. They were trying to be self-sufficient. You can see the gardening that they were doing very close to the buildings back in this time. This is one we've seen before. We see a couple of these outbuildings. These are all gone now. These have been erased, gone. This was the barn. This was originally the carriage building. They kept carriages here that were pulled by horses. And this was the wagon building where they had wagons that were pulled by horses. But this stuff is all gone now. Recently it had been used for, this was used for the farm tractors, and this was used for cars. And we get a look now down at the original plant in a way. This was the original quadrangle right here. Actually, at one point, this was all there was of St. Vincent. And we'll get a look at that. That was the original quadrangle. Not exactly done in exact proportions. Proportion-wise, this should go further north, and this part should go further south. But it was at least showing how it was separate from the from all the other buildings that eventually came up. This was the first building that came out from the quadrangle. This was Andrew Hall, which was the building that connected the quadrangle over here with the basilica over here. Andrew Hall was built in 1892. That's Andrew Hall, one of my drawings I did in the 1960s. This top floor is no longer on there. However, the bottom floor still remains. That's the top floor that has been removed. It was very badly damaged during the 1963 fire. And it refers to St. Vincent College in Beatty, Pennsylvania, and it ceased being Beatty in 1928. So this is an old picture, either 1928 or previously. It looks previous to me. Well, that's the first floor in Andrew Hall, which is still there. And you can see it was then a library when this picture was taken. But in the early 1950s, the library building was built, and the different libraries on campus were consolidated in that one library. And this area here was converted into the monastic refectory. That was the place where the monks go for meals. You can see in the distance Andrew Hall over here, among other things that have come up more recently. Now we're looking at a picture of things as they were developing. Over here we see Bede Hall, which was built in 1893. And I'm starting to talk about Bede Hall. I want to say things about that. It was named for Venerable Bede, who was an English historian and Benedictine monk. He was sometimes referred to as the father of English history. He was a very well-known person associated with the Benedictine order and English history. That's a drawing I did of Bede Hall. Not all drawings I do are the same. And you can see this part on the back, which was built in the 1930s. We'll see this. Now here's Bede Hall, which you can see this back part, which was built in the 1930s when the German sisters came over to help do work in the kitchens and refectories. Bede Hall again in the front. You're starting to see the connection with the quadrangle, which wasn't there in the beginning. Here you can see it, Bede Hall with the connection that goes over to the southwest part of the quadrangle. Now this is an early photograph, and a good one, of Bede Hall. I say it's early because at this point the connection that went over to the quadrangle is not on there yet. The first floor over here was a gymnasium. It was the first real gymnasium they had. The second floor was offices and classrooms, and up here was an auditorium, which we'll see in the next frame. And this was the first real auditorium they had. That was the auditorium in Bede Hall. And Bede Hall is no longer there. It also has been erased. For reasons I don't know, it's gone. I put Sauerkraut Tower here because Sauerkraut Tower was built in the same year that Bede Hall was built, 1893. And it was built realizing the campus was getting larger and they needed a better supply, a more generous supply of water. And that's what that's what the Sauerkraut Tower was for. It wasn't for sauerkraut. And I won't go into that. Now, by 1930, they had an airplane at St. Vincent. And you see this is an aerial view, and that's from the aerial view. We're going to go down, way down here. This was the carpenter and print shop. And one time I was wandering around out back of here, and I found something I just couldn't understand. I stood there for the longest time before I got closure on it. I finally realized it was the fuselage of an airplane. And eventually what I realized I was looking at was the remains of the old Spirit of St. Vincent. This was their airplane. They had used it to give flying lessons. They were teaching in the college a course in aeronautics, and that involved an opportunity to fly. And I found the remains of this down back of the carpenter and print shop. Now we look at 1930 aerial view again, and I'm going to once more go down, and we're going to look at this one right here. This was Alfred Hall, and we'll get a better look at Alfred Hall. That was Alfred Hall. It was built in 1907 and named for Abbot Alfred, who incidentally wasn't even a Benedictine yet when this was built. When it was first built, it was called the College Building because they desperately needed extra space for the college, and they got it. That was Abbot Alfred Cook. He was an abbot of St. Vincent. He had previously been a priest in another order, but he decided he wanted to become a Benedictine. That was Alfred Hall that we had been looking at. And over here we see Aurelius Hall. Aurelius Hall. That's another view of Aurelius Hall. Named for another abbot. That was Abbot Aurelius. And that was Abbot Aurelius, who was the first abbot who wasn't born in Germany. He was born in Pittsburgh. And he, unfortunately, I don't think it was his fault at all, got St. Vincent in a lot of problems because the Vatican wanted the Benedictines to be involved in running this place over in China. It was a university in China, and the Vatican thought that, they needed a Christian Catholic presence in China, and they asked the Benedictines to, run it, and they asked Abbot Aurelius to be chancellor, and he did. He did that, and it was not a good time to have a thing like this going on in China. There was a civil war going on in China. Eventually, there was a invasion of the Japanese. But anyhow, it did not prosper. And Abbot Aurelius made a loan from a New York City bank to keep the thing going. And it couldn't be paid because there wasn't enough money coming in. And the bank made it look like it was St. Vincent that was liable, but it was actually the school that was liable because he did it as chancellor of the school, but the bank had sharp lawyers that made the judge decide that it was St. Vincent's real estate and they should pay the loan. And it was a really serious problem. The bank even sent their people out to measure the buildings. They were going to sell them. They were going to foreclose if St. Vincent couldn't come up with the money. And it was Abbot Alfred, whom we saw previously, that was the abbot who was in the middle of all that. And he managed to get the money together to keep St. Vincent from being foreclosed upon and shut down. Now we see over here, this was Leander Hall. This was built about 1913 during the Abbot Leander's time. And that's Leander Hall, another shot. That's Abbot Leander. And we go up to other buildings. Up at Beatty, it was up here. St. Vincent was down here. Beatty was up here. Take a look at some of the buildings at Beatty. This was not St. Vincent buildings. They were just places where the trains stopped. A lot of people at St. Vincent came and went from Beatty. Another shot. Another one. I like this one. You can see the farm buildings up here from the Beatty family. They had their farm up here. It was named for them. And here we go. Another one. See, this is St. Vincent. This is the Unity branch of the railroad running by. And here was another station, St. Vincent's Station. This mapping is from 1941. That one kind of surprised me. I wasn't aware of it. Here we see the Unity branch going by. Not very definite, but we can see it. And here we see, maybe this one we'll use to say goodbye because I see we're getting past time. This was the quadrangle as it was being built. And the tower is there, which means it's 1871 or after. I was going to talk about these buildings, but we'll leave that for some other time. And say goodbye and push F11.